take a look here. I'm placing a death trap, 1, 2, 3, the cooldown is over and I can place another one. And the trick is I don't have poison trap or twisting blades in this build. So let's see what skills I actually use here then. The first thing to speak about is a basic skill which we don't use at all in this build. So just invest 2 points in anything just to unlock core skills, with the main core skill here being rapid fire. And the main reason to use rapid fire is because the skill is literally free. Yeah, it does cost you 25 energy to cast, but with the improved rapid fire, each time when you damage vulnerable enemies, there's 15 energy you get back. And in fact, this works for us like this. We pay 25 energy, which is quite important for the build, but the energy is not reducing as long as we attack vulnerable enemies. Also keep in mind that to make this build work, we're gonna need a glyph from the Paragon board. That's why if you're lower level and still want to try out this build, you will need to use a basic skill, and I think Puncture looks like the best option here. I also put here Sturdy just because I'm about to be placing all these traps from fighting in a close range quite often, so I need this extra damage reduction. I need any kind of damage reduction, to be honest, because as you know, in Nightmare Dungeons, Rogue is dying extremely easy, so we want as many different damage reduction as possible. And that's why we're taking Rugged and 3 points in reactive defense. Okay, next skill we use is Dash. The idea is basically that we initiate fights with Dash, jumping right onto enemies, and then start fighting, placing traps, and so on and so on. Anyway, one of the main skills that we have here is Call Traps. Because you know what? Call Traps is a trap. It deals damage, slows enemies, and with upgrades to it, enemies take increased damage for each second they stand in Call Trap. And what's important as well, we got additional critical strike chance against them. And more passives here. Concussive, extra critical strike chance after knocking back an enemy, and Trick Attacks. When you critical strike a dazed enemy, they are knocked down for 1.5 seconds. And yes, the enemies that we're fighting against will be dazed a lot. Then Weapon Mastery. It's a no-brainer in here because as we use crossbows, those additional 15% increased critical strike damage is a must in here. So now, what do we have next? It's Concealment. First of all, of course, because it's how we get unstoppable, and I love to have at least one way to go unstoppable in each of my builds to prevent dying from stuns. The second reason to choose Concealment, it is because it's invisible, and a skill that breaks Concealment is always a critical strike, but more importantly, after leaving invisibility, we will throw grenades. It's one of the items, one of the aspects that lets us use this ability. In order to have at least some sort of healing, I took Man in Obscurity passive, while Stealth you're healing for 9% of your maximum life per second. And we have different ways of going stealth in this build, not only Concealment, so it will heal us a lot actually. Next we have Smoke Grenade, and as you can see here it is that it's a trap as well. And again, the Smoke Grenade is granted by one of the aspects, but even if you don't have it yet, you can still use the Smoke Grenade. It will still go pretty good for this build. Passives here pretty standard, Exploit and Malice. Those are must-have for pretty much any build in my opinion. We have no Imbuement, because why would we? What we do have here is Second Wind. It's a passive that I really like to use because it grants us 15% increased lucky hit chance every time that we spend 100 energy. And remember, we have a free skill, basically Rapid Fire. Additionally, we have Trap Mastery because we're gonna be using death traps all the time. And here comes the death trap actually. We place a trap, deal some decent damage, enemies are pulled into the traps, which is quite important, and we get a lower cooldown if we kill at least one enemy. Exposure, it's a key passive here, because every time that we make a lucky hit and deal damage to an enemy affected by a trap skill, there is a 25% chance to reduce the active cooldown of your trap skills, including Death Trap, or drop a cluster of stun grenades. As for specialization, we're using Preparation here. Every 100 energy you spend reduces your ultimate skill's cooldown by 4 seconds, but even above this, using an ultimate skill resets the cooldown of your other skills. And yes, with the Rapid Fire we will spend energy all the time, so this is just great. And now going to the aspects, because to make this build really work you will need some very specific ones. First of all, this one. Your grenade skills count as trap skills. There is also a side bonus. It's not that important, but still you also get some additional movement speed. And And this means that not only enemies which stand in your call traps count for exposure and help you decrease the cooldown, but also those enemies that you daze or stun with stun grenades. Next item that I love to have here is this one. On a lucky hit that we deal damage to vulnerable enemies, there is a 45% chance to daze them for 2 seconds. We got quite a few bonuses against dazed enemies. Different kinds of bonuses, and the main one is this: dealing direct damage to a dazed enemy with an agility skill grants stealth for 4 seconds, and when we break stealth we get 45% control impaired duration reduction for 4 seconds. So it's really good, it's exactly the way of going stealth that I was talking about. So for example, we can cast dash on dazed enemies, we can cast call traps, and it also will count as a direct damage. And when we go stealth we can relocate and then cast new spells. Actually, this build will work even without these aspects, but having them is a nice feature. What we also need is a sort of a damage reduction. Here I don't have the optimal items, but I have what I have. So for example, extra armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, up to 30%. It would be better to have it up to 50%. And less damage from crowd-controlled enemies. On the main weapon I use this aspect for extra damage for our skills. It's based on our primary resource when cast, because you know we will pretty much always have the maximum amount of primary resource. Considering that we use rapid fire, we kinda need these aspects as well. A chance for rapid fire to ricochet to another target. Next, this build really needs something from the Paragon board. And before anything else, we go for Exploit Glyph. We deal more damage to vulnerable enemies, but the most important is when we damage an enemy, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. It's our way to make enemies vulnerable. So even if you've unlocked only the first Paragon board, I suggest that you use it. It's already enough for this build to work. But in case you have unlocked more than one, there are other pretty good nodes. Like for example, Deadly Ambush. You deal 23% increased critical strike damage to enemies affected by your trap skills. So we have a lot of extra critical strike damage, and our enemies will be affected by our trap skills, so our critical strike damage from the rapid fire will be like super high, and not only from the rapid fire in fact. Additionally, it's a nice idea to use ambush here for extra damage to the enemies affected by trap skills, and the legendary node No Witnesses. Your ultimate skills deal 30% increased damage and grant you 10% more increased damage for 20 seconds when cast. And we move on. I see a good reason to use this area glyph, simply because it increases the radius of non-ultimate trap skills by 25%. I actually use combat for additional critical strike damage with core skills, because rapid fire deals a lot of damage and we want a solid way to fight single targets like bosses, elites and so on. Now to how this build works. We jump in the group of enemies with dash, we cast a smoke grenade, then we cast another dash or call traps, we become invisible, then we do some damage with rapid fire, next we use concealment and become invisible again, place a death trap which resets all our cooldowns. When we fight against weaker enemies, that's when we see them just all die, but if we're up against stronger enemies, we will continue dealing damage, and since we spend a lot of energy and fight enemies affected by trap skills, the cooldown of the death trap will reset relatively fast. So in a nutshell, you have high mobility, high damage, not only thanks to your core skill, but also because of the death trap. Plus you can go invisible all the time. In general, it's a really fun build, not the easiest one though, and if you're looking for an easier build, I suggest you to go for this unkillable rogue build that is now on your screen. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys. Thank you for your attention. Bye bye.